Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order of the City of Winona San Damiano Project Steering Committee. Jake, you have the roll call. I think everybody's here. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of January 11th? So moved.
Second.
Any corrections or additions? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. We have two appearances tonight. First is Rick Bernstein, who would like to speak about the house. Rick, do you want me to hand this out now or wait
Yeah,
till?
no, that would be great.
Okay. Rick brought a handout here up. You want to pass them along here?
So my name is Rick Bernstein. Lived in Winona for 10 years at 4193 McKenna. Owner of Greenway and McKenna. And I just wanted to speak about the Frank Allen house. I'm handing out a little 2-pager about how historic preservation and sustainability are really one and the same. And I put together some facts that if we demolish the Frank Allis house, we'd be sending approximately 930,000 pounds of material to the landfill. That's based on 155 pounds of waste per square foot. You'd also be sending the equivalent or wasting the equivalent of 76,000 gallons of gasoline. Again, that's a formula based on a 6,000 square foot building. It would take about 10 to 20 years for any new building that would replace the Frank Allis building to recoup the energy loss. So just so you know, the greenest building is the one that's already built. And that's something you've heard from Brenda Williams before. But in addition to that, I just wanted to say I took a quick look at the 3 concepts. And I think one of the things that we learned from the survey is that the natural and the scenic spaces that people wanted to preserve ranked pretty high. It was about 80% of the survey said they wanted to preserve that. So I would really think that inserting any large paved surfaces would be antithetical to that concept of preserving the natural and sanctuary of that space. I know that the 50-stall parking lot next to the Alice House was to accommodate these larger meetings, but I think there are other ways to accommodate that parking. The one scenario that doesn't have any building on it started to have these parking pods off the side of the turnaround drive. And I think there's ways of interspersing pavement or not using any additional pavement to accommodate people coming to the site. There were beer tents and snow snake events that didn't need any additional parking than what the building or what the site has now. And if you look at how the Aldo Leopold does Pipers on the Prairie, they use bus shuttles. And so there are other ways of accommodating parking and any major events you might have on that site. I would also emphasize passive recreation rather than motorized recreation. I know there's been talk about inserting a pier to accommodate the motorized boaters there, but I don't know if that necessarily fits with the idea of a sanctuary and passive recreational space. So I'd really rethink that. And then lastly, I just thought a quote from Daniel Burnham might be appropriate, where he was the architect for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. He said, "Make no little plans, they have no magic to stir people's blood." And I think really what you're starting to do, maybe with the concepting phase of this master plan, is to come up with these larger, overarching concepts or visions for the property. So I would ask that you not think small, that you really think big, and come up with something, a mission for the property that'll help sell it to the public and to the funders that might want to do something with this project. Something of art, something like sustainability, make it the 4 Lake Center for Sustainability and environmental education. So they're big concepts. I think over and above just trying to make it a city park, beach, and little items like that that you can find in city parks, to really think in terms of a regional asset and really think big. So those are my comments.
Thank you. We have one more speaker who's registered. If anyone else wants to speak, there's a little form to fill in over there. If you could give it to me. Next up is Tim Torino, who would also like to speak about the house.
And I've got a handout too.
All right.
Yeah, all right. Good color. Better. Usually on this end of this table, I usually down there. My name is Tim Torino. I live at 4321 years old. I'm a semi-retired chiropractor. So on the side, and I've never had salmon on me for the last 4 years. With that, it's always been, as many of us have found, something that's been kind of intriguing. And with that, kind of my hobby over the years has been to remodel things, or my wife might call it remodeling sometimes. So I've rebuilt 3 houses here in Monona. 5,000 square foot office space, 2 bars, and I suppose you can say a playground. I like to think of myself as somewhat of a gifted amateur at this stuff, and as Nancy had mentioned earlier, I've been volunteering at the house as kind of an unofficial handyman, changing up the toilets. We got the humidity in the basement under control. And with that, I think that I've spent a lot of time in that house, and I've gotten to know it pretty well. And it's great if you can, consultant walk through and do all that stuff. You can just pick out all the little details that are good with the house or bad with the house. But I think if you spend some time in there, you can come to appreciate the way that it was built, the way that it was structured. Obviously, I'm a fan of the house in case you're on the fence. Studying the condition report, there was a lot of small things in that report. What really comes to mind really is there's one big problem, and that's really the foundation under the porch on the lakeside. Okay. Everything else, what's amazing is that the stuff that was built in 1894, solid. It's amazing. The strength, the quality of the materials back in craftsmanship, it's amazing. The stuff that was probably done in the 20s is the stuff that's falling apart, or in the 70s, whenever they remodeled that way. It was that particular foundation and block wall was done with cinder block. Okay, that's different than cement block. If cinders were for pole, they're basically glass, and they're combined, and it's a brittle cinder block. Okay. So with that, that's one of the reasons why that particular part of the house is failing. But also then they built the concrete steps as you step out of the porch down toward the lake. Those have tipped forward and they're actually pushing it on. Point is that that's something to factor in. The reason I'm bringing this to you tonight is because you're coming up with these different plans. One of them has the house, one of them doesn't have the house, the next one doesn't have the house. And as he was just saying, that you've got to look at the house and find something that's maybe exciting or different, or in this case, the same is what I'm going to be talking about. With that, really, what I'm standing here for 2 purposes. One is to talk about that cement block that needs to be repaired. And now I see a need an opportunity as well. So I included in the packet I just gave you. I pulled it off the report website. And so the 2 things I want to talk about is first of all that porch. And second of all, as I've been walking around that house for how many 100 hours by now, I've envisioned the way that this house could work. It's no longer a single family home. Isn't that amazing? A 3-bedroom house at 6,000 square feet. That's the way I live. So with that, two purposes here is consider block and then repurposing of the rooms, which is a little different than what MSA would come up. First of all, since that cinder block wall needs to come down somewhere, I'm suggesting to you to include in your plans that you bump it out another 10 feet and extend the porch another 10 feet. It would run the length of the building. Now let's go from the colored plane to the picture of the house. 1927. There you'll see the porch ran the full length. It was much longer. That's the number one that I put on it. There's on the roof of that porch was a railing that went the entire. So now you've got open air seating for meetings, whatever the sense of being. Number three over here is a screened in area. That's pretty nice. And above that screened in area is another open air space that then comes off of the third floor. A lot of functionality, a nice way to improve it. Probably the more expensive part of the whole thing is the foundation anyway. But I will leave that up to the engineers. So that's, I know that you're early in the process here, but my plan A is the one with the house. And if the house had more functionality, then that might make it more attractive to keep. Second thing on my list is the repurposing. I thought it was pretty creative for the sign restroom where you suggested. But as you look at that, I think it works better in the existing kitchen. That's the purple. Here. Plumbing is directly below it, easy to get to. The handicap accessible. Little blue box off to the side of the existing bathroom. There, you go into what is being called the meeting room here, and that would be an expansion of the existing bathroom, which is way too tiny. But isn't that the cutest thing? That little corner sink, that's really that's crazy. But that would be sufficient for make the bathroom bigger, possibly handicapped accessible. I don't know. It's not my field. Or it might be a spot for an elevator. Bring it up to the second floor. Okay. The on the top here with the yellow outline. Right over the top of the whole storage area. That would be a great spot for the kitchen, in my opinion. Really what you need to do is add a sink to that and some electrical. And the sink is on the other side of the wall right now. So the plumbing would be very simple to do. And lastly on my list is the entryway. So here on the side is the existing entryway that could be expanded a little bit more so that it certainly would satisfy handicap accessibility. And then the ramp could come out from there to the parking lot. And that would be what you would need. So that is what I'd like to present tonight, and hope that's of interest, and you might take those as good suggestions. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Tim. Anybody else want to? Okay, then we will move on. We do not have any unfinished business. 6A under new business is the vision and statement of purchase purpose discussion. This is something that Andy and I have have been working on, and just sort of as a way of synthesizing a lot of what we know about the property and what we know about what we've learned from the various focus groups and the survey and that type of thing. So it's by no means a finished product, but it's sort of a starting point, and we just thought it was a way to just include some more information all gathered in one spot. Andy, did you want to?
Yeah, I think one reason we thought that this was important is to have a reference point as we start to make these decisions. So having, we can obviously all look back at the minutes and look back through all the materials, but if there's, as we're starting to get into the conceptual plans point, when we have questions of why did you do this, we're hoping that we can point back to this document and say, well, from at least the initial survey, this is what we gleaned from it. From the additional feedback, this is what we gleaned. And so this is, as Mary said, this isn't meant to be, sounds like your computer's taking off. This isn't meant to be a final document. This is going to be evolving, and I think it will adapt as we get the next survey and as we hear more information and feedback. But again, we're looking at this to be kind of a mission statement. I think Rick might have mentioned kind of, create a mission of what we want this property to be. And I think when we did our working group a number of months ago, we created, an initial one. I think in here you'll see that there's a little bit more of maybe a aspirational vision statement in it. But again, it's not meant to be an exhaustive document. It's meant to be kind of a guiding star as we start to go into the next real phases of decision making. And so hopefully everyone that's had a chance to kind of review it, take a look at it. We're hoping to get your feedback, input. We don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because we have a lot of other things to cover, but this is something that we would like to have a vote on at our next meeting in order to create, this will help us create talking points, for example, and we want to make sure we're all talking from the same sheet of music type of situation. So we are open, obviously, to feedback and kind of thoughts. Hopefully nothing is too much of a surprise because it was really kind of just a combination of a lot of different documents that are already out there.
And I think we'd be happy to hear if anyone has comments or things to add or questions or whatever tonight, but if you come up with other things, certainly feel free to email them to Andy and I.
Yeah.
Or Jake, and he'll get them to us. So we doesn't have to be all done tonight. If you'd like to look at it for, a little bit and take some time, that's fine too. So.
We did have a question, last meeting, Wes brought up the 4, I think he called them guiding principles.
Pillars.
Pillars, yeah. We can't find those pillars. Could that be added to it?
So, I mean, it's a great question because I think that's something that the Friends really adapted and adopted as we move forward. It hasn't been something necessarily that this committee or the city has adopted. And so I think you'll find, and maybe you're saying that it's definitely not in here, maybe threads of those kind of culture, educational, recreation type things in here. But we're hoping that with this document, whether we want to include that or not would be decided. And then that would help us with those kind of pillar talking points as we move forward.
So this would be like the official approved vision and goals for the project.
Yeah, that's the hope.
We meet again before public input session.
That was my question.
I think we have another meeting in March before public input, right? I know we have the timeline on here.
Yeah.
But I think we meet in March and then the public input, I think, is end of March, April.
So I imagine a question we'll get at the session is, how are you going to be making? What's the framework you're going to be using to make decisions? So that would be helpful.
And a lot of this, kind of incorporates, condenses a lot of what we've heard, like natural playground, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm hoping that, an answer to that question, not to redirect them, but would be like, here's my answer, but also this is a longer document that you can take a look at. Nancy.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say a couple of things. One is, I guess I would disagree, Dan, that it's not, it didn't say environmental, historical, cultural, and recreational as 4 words, but they are most definitely reflected in the outcomes. Every single one of those. So I think we could probably clarify that to make, if this group wants to, in terms of approving a document. But they definitely were, at least the way I read it, it seemed like they were definitely reflected in the outcomes. And then the second thing I would say is that I found the document to be really helpful this afternoon. Thankfully, I had a couple of hours to over the conceptual documents and with this document, and I actually used the outcomes that were listed on the document as sort of what I would in my consulting refer to as a strategy screen, which is I kind of through each one of these conceptual plans against those desired outcomes. To see sort of which ones seem to fit the most with what we were hoping for in a master plan. And I just found it a really helpful framework to be able to do that, which is, I think, the way that Wes used to. So I really appreciate you guys putting the time in to do it.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together. It's really helpful. So the one thing that stuck out to me under the sort of summary of public input and focus groups was C, elements that did not achieve general consensus, which is basically what to do with the break Alice house. If we get rid of it, do we build shelter, or we get rid of it, do we not replace it with anything? That I'm reading that. That's kind of where we are, right? Which is obviously a major decision we need to make at some point. Or be nice if we got more consensus, and maybe we go out to the public with the concepts. They do sort of one of them keeps the house, one of them has a minimal shelter, and one of them has a bigger new shelter. So, we'll get more answer to that.
Yeah, certainly. Hopefully.
Yeah. I think, yeah, we see the input we get from the public about the concepts. Hopefully we'll help guys.
Yeah. I mean, certainly one thing that might be a result is that, this committee, this body decides that there needs to be a facility and further study needs to happen. So, I mean, I think I'm mentally preparing myself for at the end of this year, there might be a decision to have a facility, but we don't know if it's the house or the facility yet. Barring additional research on what opportunities there are for example, historic register for the property, which would open up some additional avenues for funding. But yeah, I mean, I hope through this feedback, we'll continue to get more feedback about, the importance of house to people. Or not.
Anyone else?
I'd like to just speak to the house.
That needs to stay open.
I was just gonna, can I do that too? I don't know.
Just don't want people to get the idea they can't come.
No, I know.
I just want to speak to the house a little bit as a representative that I am on the Landmarks Commission. I think everyone needs to be reminded that this is a landmark in the city of Monona and that the city of Monona does have a landmarks ordinance, and that anything that would want to be done to the exterior or any demolition process would have to go to the Landmarks Commission for a COA, a certificate of appropriateness. It's not a quick process, and I think I want you all to be aware of that. Secondly, I agree with Rick's statements about the sustainable practices of historic preservation and keeping the house. If we are saying let's just tear down the house to have an open green space, I think that's a really irresponsible thing to do in regards to sustainability. I don't know the numbers Rick that Rick has, but this is embodied carbon, and to tear it down and to build something new and create new carbon, it is only enlarging our carbon footprint, and Monona is known to be a sustainable community. So I think we need to keep that in mind as well.
Agrees. Anyone else?
What did you call it? What kind of carbon?
Embodied carbon?
Embodied.
Mary Lee or Jesse, do either of you have anything to add? Doesn't sound like.
Not at this time, no.
Jesse, okay.
Thank you.
Oh, no, okay. Well, if you do have any other comments, please send them to Andy and I, and we can work on updating the document for the next time, so. Moving on, presentation and discussion of the 3 concept plans. Does everyone have a printout of the concepts? Dan, did you how are you gonna handle this?
Yeah, no, Jay, can you give me permission to share?
Are you
Jake's still there?
Yes.
There we go.
No.
Pardon?
This looks. Okay,
Nice.
well, you use your. I'll record it. I'll do this. Okay. Give the mayor a second. So on the phone call, you'll see Inman, a name that's not familiar to you. Inman works with Alexis at Quinelli. And so she's been involved.
Hello, hi, this is Iman. Just wanted to greet everyone.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you.
And then Alexis is with us. She said that she would start the meeting in her car. And it looks like she's home now.
There she is.
I'm here.
Okay. She had some kid issues, so. she made it. So, the concepts, when we met last time, we talked about looking at the concepts with the house versus just a picnic shelter versus an event type building where you have a bigger space in it. So that was the models that we worked with. Concept A is retaining the house in some form in it. With all these concepts, I'll let Alexis go into what we would be consider doing with the buildings on these sites. So with concept A, we retain the driveway as, for the most part, as a widened pedestrian walk. And you'll see on all 3 diagrams, we got the term multi-use walk. So what we're getting at there is that walk would be paved, concrete or asphalt. It would be wider, that you could use as a service drive for like the beer garden, and you could bring food carts and things on that path. So that's what the multi-use walk means. So on concept A, the driveway is retained, coming in from the north east side to the house, and then that multi-use walk goes around, encircles the house. So when you have events, that walk can serve different things, anywhere from art shows to the food carts, whatever you want to have at an event. The event lawn is pretty much where you're using it today on the lake side of the house. But it also extends where you're using the area near the tennis court, the foundation for the tennis courts, the beer garden, and then back towards the center of the site. So that lighter green area, the maintained lawn. The other colors, I'll just point this out on the first diagram. The other colors on the diagram, that sort of orange color, would be native plants, native perennial plants or prairie plants. So you start to establish more natural areas instead of maintain mown lawn in the entire park. And then the dark green is woodland plantings. So over time, you would start to replace some of the invasives and the woodland materials and maintain the trees in the wood stands. And then the yellow color is the farm area or the egg fields. And then the pink color is the inclusion of fruit trees or fruit gardens, shrubs or trees, but it's associated with the fields. So you can see in concept A, the grass, the maintained lawn area is around the house. The parking lot that would serve the house comes in near the entrance to the driveway. But it's away from that shared driveway with the residents to the south border. So within the open space boundary. Still has good sight lines on entering and exiting. What we did with the parking lot on all three concepts was look at different levels and amounts. And Rick kind of pointed that out in his discussion. So concept A is the largest parking lot we're showing on any of the three concepts. So this one has 51 stalls. There's 4 accessible stalls, or 6 accessible stalls close to the building. On the east side of the building, you can see ramps going up. So that would be getting people up to that first floor level of the house, away from the house, and not running that ramp adjacent to the house. This secondary walks is kind of a little bit hard. You might be able to see it better on your printouts, but it's that lighter tan color. That could be anything from a mulch path to a binder course path, which is like pea gravel that has a binder in it that kind of holds it together, but it's still permeable. And then there's some brown trails on there, and those would be main paint trails that could be mowed lawn to again a mulch path. So it's kind of the third level path. We're showing all the paths as accessible, so you can see where it says the Pebble Beach, it kind of winds around. That goes up the little bluff hill there. So they're all 5% or less. If we work from the north to the south, you'll see nodes, and what we're starting to establish with the nodes are gathering areas. So when we talked with the schools and Bill Quackenbush, they talked about areas where they could hold different types of meetings and events with smaller groups. So we were starting to identify nodes throughout the park. Open space that could be anything from a council ring to just an open maintained area that you can do things in, to even natural playground. So you'll see some images towards the end that start to play up some ideas that you can include into the open space. So you can see there's 8 nodes in the park. They all have different views and different uses. Some have great views of the house and the internal parts of the park. Others have great views of the lake, the Capitol, and the things that are so wonderful about the bluff line of the shoreline. The Pebble Beach back up to the north end is we call those boater beaches a lot. So that's pebbles being small pebbles so that you can bring a boat right up to a kayak, canoe, up to a motorboat. And it's just a safe and easy way to beach a boat and let people come onto the site. I'll point out on the west side, you'll see a dark line making around the node 4 and node 5 are at. That's the stone wall. We don't have an exact survey of the site, but based on the contours that we're seeing from Dane County GIS, the wall's somewhere relatively close to that layout. So that gives us an idea of where we might be able to punch through the wall or around the wall to get access again down to a pier or to the lake edge on that bluff end. Now with this version, this concept, where node number 4 is, that's an accessible ramp. So it's an 8% ramp. You can see like little squares where Dan's got the arrow. That's a landing pad. So we can only go 30 feet at an 8% slope. And then we have to have a landing pad 30 feet. So there's enough grade on this concept to have an accessible route down to that pier at node 5, which is where the existing, there's a couple of chairs down there now where you go down the steps by the wall. And then right next to node 5 is those existing steps, and then a new path connecting back up to that multi-use path around the house. The pier on this one, it snakes around that ramp system to get you down to the elevation of the pier on the lake. The idea, there's a couple of different ways we can look at a pier, and you'll see some pictures later on. It could be a fixed pier on spud piles, which is like the sailing boat, or it can be a floating dock structure. But it wouldn't be not necessarily a fixed pier that would stay there year round, given the ice loads on Lake Minnetonka. We're including a bus stop on this concept. And you can see it has direct access straight to the house. One thing that we haven't included on the plans are bike parking. We haven't got that detailed with the concepts yet. We kind of felt like that would be more appropriate when we get to the comprehensive plan. But we can definitely add bike parking to these concepts. We also talked to the bee cycle, and they're interested in the station somewhere nearby. So that's something that we need to start thinking about. We want to include that on the site somewhere. Back up at node 2, you'll see what looks like a pond. It's a low area prior to crop where the gardens are at, egg fields. And that's a good space that are to be developed as your stormwater management pond on site. So we want to try and retain as much surface runoff in the park before it goes out into Lake Monona. That's best management practices. And where the egg fields are located is good soils. So we'd hate to take those good soils out to put a pond in. So if we work back up the hill, we can collect some of that stormwater before it gets down into the egg field as well. So you'll start to see a blue area in the diagrams about in that location, because it's a good low area that can be easily turned into stormwater collection. On this version, we're putting the idea out that you could use that stormwater basin as a part of the park. Don't turn your back on it. It could be a wetlands, and you could have boardwalks and wetlands, that sort of thing. So you can see the darker paths are boardwalks that wetlands.
Can I ask a question at this point? Would that have to be formed? And
Yeah, so the stormwater. And as you move into constructing of the park, you would want to start to take all your hardscapes, hard surfaces, and tilt them towards that pond so that they're driven all that sediment that comes from those hardscapes into that pond, as opposed to going out directly into Lake Monona.
Okay.
But the side's conducive, it tilts that way.
Sure.
For the most part.
You would just have to do some additional digging out of some areas to create a basin or for retention.
The blue areas and Dan, feel free to jump in if I'm missing anything. Oh, maintenance shed. Our last meeting, we asked Dave what he would use, and he said the garage. So we didn't want to go that big. That seemed like a big building, but this is a fairly good size maintenance shed. And as we move forward into the concept, that you can tell us how big that needs to be and size it.
Other than this one is the one that keeps the house.
Yeah.
Are there sort of an overall idea for this concept that sort of guided your decision making on like where paths will come?
Yeah, on the so for paths, again, this one used the driveway, especially on the north end. When you get down to the parking lots, and the parking lot eliminated the existing driveways, and so we used the existing driveway as a spine on this one, and then main circulation for the events was again that multi-use path around the house. So it's kind of like a spine with a donut on the end of it. And then the rest of the trails are meandering, mostly along the bluff line and then in the center of the site, as opposed to being up along Monona Drive. So this one is, I would say this one's more segmented than the other ones. You kind of see it has a more of a gridded pattern to it. But what we were trying to respond to with the past were providing a lot of walking trails and through woodlands and prairie grasses. So, people would be closer to the natural and nature and wildlife that they were saying in the survey. We were trying to set up these landscape zones with the woodland plantings and the prairie plantings and have those zones be where a lot of the walks are.
First for you. So I was kind of surprised at, with this one, although, again, it might have been, didn't quite understand, like, out of the, what you're referring to as ag field versus prairie, the yellows are so close, it was hard for me to tell which was which. Maybe it was just me. But, it struck me that, maybe the way I was reading is that this would represent a lot of ag, quite a bit of ag land.
Yeah, so it is close in color. So where Dan just wrote ag field, that's the yellow. Where Bill had the corn.
Okay, so the other shades, the 3 blocks in the
Yeah, that would
center,
be
if you
the-
will, that's prairie.
That would be prairie or perennial, I think. Native
Okay.
planting.
So I guess one, I would just say that for me, I was kind of, well, one of the things that draws me to the site, and I think it draws a lot of people to the site, is the fact that it kind of feels like a mini arboretum. And because of the, and I know we're taking out trees, but I know I was really struggling with transform. I mean, I get we don't want to be mowing a lot of grass, but at the same time, I was kind of struggling with that whole section, which is quite a bit of acreage, being prairie and taking all of those trees out of the middle. It just seemed like, why would we do that? There's some beautiful trees.
Oh, so the trees aren't being removed. The trees would be in the prairie.
So it'd be more savanna. Planted underneath.
It just, I mean, that wasn't clear to me, because when I think of prairie, I don't think of a ton of trees being in the prairie. I think of it as being pretty open. So even though there were some trees there lightly, I didn't know that you were showing where the trees were now, and okay, so there's gonna be trees and prairie. Okay.
We can change the nomenclature is probably
No, that's fine.
more misleading than the intent, but.
Do we know what it originally was? Was this like an oak savanna, or do we not have that information? So it's pretty typical in the whole area, but it does change sometimes near the lake, so. But I really like the idea of the savanna prairie, incorporating that in, and yeah, having the trees, that's just kind of one of those transitions between this, like,
So a good, sorry, Doug. I was just gonna say, a good example of that is Woodland Park.
exactly.
So if you go to Woodland Park, basically see that it's savanna, right?
Right.
And so it will create that shielding, and just in the description, it says it's intended to kind of create a bit of a shield, so there's a bit of a reveal to this when you come through this, so like think of late August, it'll take all year for this to grow up. And even managing it in terms of prescribed burns would come into play, things like that. But think of it like as glamour, late summer, you come through it and it's tall, and then it opens up to this perfectly manicured, or mostly manicured, formal looking space. So it does have that impact.
Yeah. And when we talked with Bill, he said that the people that lived here would have burned underneath the woodlands, and they would have kept that clean and not let the invasive come. So it would be taking it back to that that inhabitants, which was thousands a year. So, prior to that, I don't know what it looks, no one really knows what it looks like. And if you look at the photos of the Alice house, they planted a lot of the trees that are out there now because they're little bitty whips in a lot of the pictures. So, and just given the types of trees that are on the property are tend to lean more towards they were planted. They were picked, selected and planted.
Or they were bird poop trees.
Yeah, and they were.
Not necessarily planted,
Yeah.
at least not by humans.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
Just a quick level set. What's our goals for our feedback on these right now? It's feedback for then editing, for then public, input.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my question for all of us. If you're up on the stage presenting these, how are you differentiating these? And, what are if you were to rename it concept A, what would be the name is? And what would the theme, and how, I'm just thinking from
Yeah.
I imagine there's things, there's maybe you can talk about sort of what reactions you're hoping or what there's some things that are the same in all of them. Maybe that's the one way to think about this or present it to us right now. What's the same, what's different? And what should we expect the public to react to? And what do we hope that the public's gonna react?
Yeah, so on this one, again, it's keeping the driveway but as a pedestrian pathway, not a driveway. And then adding substantial parking to the site, basically, because 51 stalls is a lot of cars from the site. Painting the house, adding pier adjacent to the house, because you'll see the pier really in the concepts. And then this one sort of intended the stormwater basin to be a pond, so wet pond. And this one, the other ones, not necessarily be like a wetland or just a depression with wetland plants in it that would be a stormwater basin.
So, I was gonna ask, what do you think would be most beneficial for reviewing these as a group, going through the concepts first and then comparing them, or going each individual concepts and giving our
I was just.
opinion? Because I think there are things from each concept that could be switched around.
So maybe let's go through the concepts and then we can go back and forth because Dan's using the mural board so we can slide around.
Okay.
But I wanted Alexis to go through the buildings on each one of them as we were going through so that we didn't lose our thought on what was being shown. So I think we can go to her now on the house, and then we'll just go through the concepts and then come back and get your opinions on it.
I think obviously, we only have a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
So we can't spend like a half hour on each item.
Keep it high level.
Yeah, so.
Can I just make one comment that this would apply to all three of them, I think. Like the pier is on all three, but it's kind of in different locations. Maybe that some that could be indicated on here that it's not. Like the location of the pier, you could do concept B, but the pier where it is on concept A, so it's floating. And I guess I would also, an idea would be to show the parking lots as a range on each of them from like 32 to 51. So that people don't look at A and go, well, I don't want to do that because the parking lot's really big and I can do the park. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and what we do with the surveys too, when it go the public surveys develop, the first comment that we say on the survey is you can select items from each concept that you're looking at.
Yeah.
And don't get, basically don't get stuck on one concept being that's end all.
Yeah.
So if you like a parking lot from one versus the other one, tell us which one you like. So we preference surveys that way.
And then the last thing I would just suggest that we show bike parking on here somehow,
Mhm.
even if it says this isn't necessarily where it's gonna be. Because we're showing a lot of,
So we know there's gonna be somebody.
right, so that people don't say, don't look at it and think we're not doing anything for bike.
I have a quick logistical question with parking. Does it have to be a certain distance from a facility? And why I'm asking that is like all these parking lots are kind of like further into the property and like. I would almost picture a parking lot right next to Monona Drive to keep all the traffic there and then. But I didn't know if there was a reason, I mean. Like ADA acceptable or something.
Just, as long as you have an accessible walk,
Should be fine. Okay.
you should be fine. Other than you might get a little pushback on inclement weather or in the distance away from a building, but other than that, as long as you're providing an accessible route from the parking lot. Within, but this site's not that big.
Yeah, I'm not talking 100
Yeah.
feet away or something like that, so.
So I'm actually wondering if it makes more sense to go through landscape concepts first.
I kinda wanna get to
Given that
some-
it's 6 o'clock or nearly 6 o'clock and we're only here another hour, as opposed to going through the individual facility concept.
Whichever route you want to go, we go.
That makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
right.
log down,
And a
but-
lot of this is duplicated in other. I think we have to leave it.
Sorry, Alexis.
So next week-
We'll get to you. Alexis.
That's okay. It actually makes sense to me as well, so.
Okay, good.
So moving on to concept B,
So to go to Wes's point, what would you call concept B?
Well, the key feature that, but we've added that on there too, so that when we show the concept, we can have key features that might help people distinguish the three. So on this one, the key features are the house has been removed and it's replaced with a shelter with restaurants, just a basic shelter with restaurants. That's the building down in the south. The little square to the north is the maintenance shed. And it's closer to the farm and some of the higher maintainable spaces. This concept, we use the driveway, maintain the driveway as a one-way system. In and back out. The only thing that we did adjust was the south end. Again, we pulled it away from the neighboring driveway so that they're not top of each other and provide a little bit safer. This one has the least amount of parking. There's 16 total stalls, 10 at the shelter, 6 at the gardens, the egg field. Less paths on this one than concept A. The what we call the multi-use path or the multi-usable path is the white that goes from the shelter to the bluff and then on around to node number 4 and then back down to node number 7. So you can see the thicker, wider path. Again, that's all these paths are accessible. But that would be your paved path that you could do multiple things with. And the other paths, which there are far less of the mulch or binder course, smaller intimate paths on this concept. This one has a large events lawn and lawn area. It kind of wraps around node number 6. But where the tree stand is in the middle of that, we thought it would be a fun place to have. Node number 6 might be a natural play area in the woods with natural landscape around it, as opposed to maintain lawn. And then we're using the prairie on this one to frame that lawn area on the east side. And again, the woodlands you'll see on all 3 concepts because people want to keep the trees. Nobody wants to eliminate the trees, and that's where the thickest trees are. So that's just basically maintaining that understory and then adding some walks in the tree lines. The area where I talked about the low part. This one is more of a just a stormwater collection area. And again, it should, in our mind, should be planted with native materials and not be mowed and maintained as divots in the ground. So as you arrive to the park on the driveway, it would be surrounded by wetlands on both sides, native plantings. And then the garden area, there's a trail that circles the garden, the egg field, and then the fruit gardens are started to be incorporated around it, where there's openings in the large canopy trees. So again, those could be small fruit trees or small bushes and whatnot, and edible landscapes. This one has 2 beaches on it. Again, it could be a large pebble beach or it could be a sandy beach. If you want to go that route with access.
Where's the sandy beach?
It could be the bigger one, the pebble beach. And then there's a smaller beach there. That could be the pebble beach. And the one that's labeled pebble beach could be the sand beach because it's large, much larger than any of the other beaches that we're showing on the diagram. That area of the site is low to the shoreline, so creating a beach wouldn't be too hard. The pier on this one is located where boaters are accessing the site now. So if you look over the wall, there's a tree stump. A tree was removed real close to the wall, and it's the shortest part of the wall. It's about where we're showing that walk veering off. People come up now in that area. It's a beaten down path. So that's where they're accessing the property from their boats. So we thought, and I walked all the way down along that edge of the wall. It's accessible if it's developed. It's not too hilly. So that's a place that you might be able to locate a pier. You not have to do a whole lot other than ramp down to the pier once you left the land down to the pier. Again, we're just showing piers now as ones that could reach a depth that a boat could come up to. The white lines are bathymetric lines. So the first one is 3 feet deep, I think. And then the second one is 5 feet deep. So you can see once you get north in the site, it's pretty shallow. That's why the boats don't come in so far up there, other than like pontoon boats, that sort of thing. So if motorized boating access is something that you want at the site, and the pier needs to go out a little ways to get to the deeper drafts on the boat and the props. If it's a fishing pier or just access to the water pier and kayaks, and we can shorten that way down the pier itself. And then again, we've got we're showing 8 nodes. So we're showing 8 nodes on all 3 concepts. And again, those could be anything from a council ring to just mowed grass to logs that on in the nature plan. And we put view arrows on those nodes so you can see how we're starting to set up the nodes and establishing views out and in the interior to the site as well. Framing those views. We go to concept 3. Concept 3 is the one where we talked about a new building that would be have a community room or events room in it that could house events to a certain size. We started, well, Alexis can get into more detail on the structure, but we started to play around with a footprint. It's not set in stone. The main idea with the building here is that we're using the existing driveway for the alignment of the road coming into the site. That aligns with the Capitol. It's kind of interesting. You can't see it, but when you look on Google Earth, it aligns with the Capitol for the most part. And so the idea there is when you come into the site, the building would be, the event room would be a glass box or a see-through on that building. And then you would park and go inside the building, and the location of the building's near the tennis court foundation. So at that point, you're up high enough that if you maintain some of the vegetation, so clean up some of the trees and limb them up a little bit, you should be able to look right at the Capitol in the build from that location and have that alignment. And then the events lawn comes off of the other side of the building from the parking lot. This one has the middle-sized parking lot, 30. The events lawn relates to the building and then to the bluff. And so it's a large enough area to have beer gardens and different festivals at. The multi-use path is around the parking lot and interior to the site. So it's sort of similar to the way you use the beer garden now, that people are out having fun in the lawn towards the lake, but then the back side is where all your venues are, your food and different things. So they're not in the way of your views. This one, the walks, more natural walks are around the perimeter of the site. So it goes around the bluff and then back to the east to that multi-use path. So this one, the rooms, the landscape is separated by a walk. So you can see the events south of the events lawn is a prairie area. There's a path that goes along that edge of the prairie and the open lawn. So we tried to set up rooms of landscapes with the walks on this version. The pier is further north and would be accessed down that slope on the north end to the woodlands, where it's a little bit flatter to the shoreline. And all the boating activity would be to the north, motorized and non-motorized. And then leaving the bluff on the south area open to views and a lot of traffic coming up to that from the bank. This one again, the stormwater worked really good on this one because all the built landscapes, being that multi-use path, parking lot, and buildings, all are sitting on existing topography that drains that direction to that stormwater pond system. So that's kind of quick and basic.
Any questions about either of those concepts?
We're gonna go over all three concepts together.
Yeah.
Makes sense. The front lawns are different side views.
The events lot, yeah.
Might be helpful, maybe not now, but at some point to understand what that means.
So. I mean, I concur with Rebecca that are we gonna go through all three, and how do you wanna manage us in terms of going all three? I mean, they're.
I mean, I feel like it should be high level in the sense of not getting nitpicky about it, understanding that you're trying to get elements that you like and dislike on each one of these.
Yeah.
Is that
so
what, is
that's
that what you're trying
I
to?
mean, that's what he's,
Point.
right?
Yeah,
Trying to
because I
do
think-
on
Yeah.
a public input. What
Yeah.
are you trying to achieve through these?
So that and I made that comment before what Andy just said, we do show things on plans that we don't necessarily want because we want to validate that we don't want those things. So I think what would be most beneficial to us is to have you evaluate these three concepts, is that this is what you want to take forward to the public to get those positive and negative comments from. You know, it's difficult to have three concepts that are all positive and very close and similar, because then we're not going to get distinguishable votes.
I don't know if this is a good example of like a larger concept that I feel like is missing from maybe all of these. And we mentioned kind of the bike parking. I mean, I hear a lot of feedback of how do we get bikes into this property? And I feel like none of these really show a good flowing from Monona Drive where, you know, there's the bike lane. Attracts them in unless they are already like halfway down the property. I don't know if that isn't a good example.
It's actually
Of something that I
question
thought.
is there something missing from all three of these that we want to evaluate? That would be a good question.
That would be one that I would like to.
Yeah, it's like, good answer.
Is there anything else like that that anyone can think of? Well, there. If I remember correctly, one of the environmental features that we had talked about was. And again, that this could be one of the nodes, but one of the environmental features that we talked about was the fact that it's a birding hotspot and the birding is really. Critical, and we talked about I think some people in the feedback that we got in the survey and elsewhere, you know, whether that's just interpretive signage on paths or whether that's a cantilever platform is one of the nodes or something that we looks at, but I don't know if we're thinking about some sort of bird-related infrastructure.
I almost think that that's next level.
Next level?
Yeah, because I think that would be one of the nodes.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Okay.
We talked about also, and I think we talked about it in our last meeting, history, or like a timeline as a part of the site somewhere. You know, that could be the multi-use path. Or it could be the outer ring system.
I
But
don't
again,
get
I
what
think
you
those are
mean by a timeline on a path.
interpretive timeline.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
But I agree that kind of now
It's
you're getting
kind of the
into
next
the
level.
details.
Right,
where you get into the
Right, you
master
got into the detail, correct.
Do you have outdoor, when I was looking at our summary of feedback, outdoor performance gathering spaces? I didn't. Is that a no?
The outdoor, that would be the event lawn. Like, are you talking about the bigger performances or more intimate?
Or? I'm just going off of our list here. So,
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question because that could be a larger object that people would either be repulsed by or agree with, right? And location of that would be important.
Well, are we talking about building something or just?
Yeah,
more natural, I thought we talked last time.
Like a natural amphitheater?
Yes.
Oh, more like an
Yeah, like,
More of like the event.
Building
lawn,
it into
maybe.
the.
so it's more the event lawn, yeah.
Yeah.
Described by-
Would probably be in the event lawn because it's maintained lawn space. But we could show a bowl amphitheater on one.
Or you could call it performance lawn or something like
Yeah.
that, so that people know, because when I think of event lawn, it could be anything. I think it could be.
I'm thinking of that lawn is more
Yeah,
flatter.
yeah,
Can be used
exactly.
for different functions. You bring in, meet amphitheaters. Is there any? It's like area of this site that naturally lends itself to,
The stormwater.
right?
Yeah, so swim lots of hotspots.
If we're gonna have to be conscious of creating some retention areas, maybe we have to do some terraforming, you know, then we can create, and there's wonderful examples of really naturally landscaped amphitheaters too.
Actually, one of the better areas, Dan, you could point, so I think everybody can see at home. Node 2 on this one, just to the left of it, see how all the contours are coming together there, that's setting up more of an amphitheater in there, but it is woodland in there. So in order to put an amphitheater in, there'd be a lot of tree removal. So it doesn't, you don't have to take all the trees out because there's amphitheaters that have trees in the seed.
Yeah.
But you probably would have to thin it some to get enough clearance to mow it, maintain it, and sit on it. But it could be nice if it had some canopy trees.
That example would mean the stage was the beach.
Yeah.
I mean, I think.
And it could be a dual thing where it could be like a deck. Fishing
Yeah.
pier
Oh, yeah.
or something, but the fishing pier could be a stage when you have a.
Oh, I wasn't saying it that I disliked it. I was just making sure that was.
Yeah.
It seems like we have enough of that open current turf space that we might be able to find something there without, you get a lot of the habitat. All three of these essentially have that same beach in the same spot, so it could be a,
Could be an
take
amphitheater.
one of them and do something different. Or I guess in concept A, you don't. Maybe.
Can I just give a high level feedback on
Yeah.
what I thought of, between three concepts? I think you explaining them helped, understand why you made certain decisions. And with those explanations, comes the thoughts of, you talked about where the boats access the site currently, and that's why you put the park pier there. And then you talked about using the current drive. I feel like those things should be like the least amount that we do on the space, and maybe those things could be on one plan rather than splitting them up.
Mhm.
So where you have like your existing drive and existing pier, like those could be taken up on the same plan rather than split up. And maybe even like the least amount of parking stalls would be on that plan, because that's the least amount you're doing to it.
Kind of like the
Well, it's in
minimalist plan.
Yeah.
Is that plan B, right? I mean, it's the. that is
Minimal.
all on
That's
there.
probably, yeah,
Yeah.
right. I think also,
Rents a house, so.
that's what my thought would be, but maybe you wanted to show that parking ramp or parking lot for a reason. On
Where-
that spot,
The big one, the big
Yeah.
parking lot. That, the reason we showed it on A was the house is a big
right, that's
structure.
what I was
it's a lot
kind of
square
thinking.
footage.
But again, many of our parks don't even have parking, so parking is not necessarily, we need 51 stalls. Some of the other things that stood out to me, would be, you said there could be a space for a playscape,
Mhm.
maybe show it. Definitely like the bikes, you want to show where people are gonna want to know where they can access by bike. And I'm also a little bit, I understand where you put the stormwater management because it's at the low topography, but it's so far away from like the 51 parking stalls. So how are you managing stormwater at the parking?
It all tilts that way, so you could,
It seems like you would have to have a lot of infrastructure for that, though.
in the parking lot, you,
I mean,
There
that's
would
gotta
be-
cross a long distance.
yeah, you could do overland, see where it said, Dan, if you point over by the bus stop. And then go over a little bit, see, there's a swale that goes along the drive.
Yeah,
You'd have to do some land forming to get, but you could do it over the surface, you don't have to put in pipes.
that was just something that stood out to me. I think. The last thing probably that stood out to me. I think that might be, the last thing that stood out to me is the amount of impervious paving.
Mhm.
I think there is a lot, especially in this plan right here. There's so much concrete or asphalt,
Mhm.
and I think it's way too much.
I would agree.
I really don't think all of these paths need to be, and there are impervious paper or pervious pavers that you can use rather than, or pervious. Driveway kind of things that you can use rather than just these huge amounts.
I had the
of concrete.
same reaction, but my question is, do we want to validate that?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be worthwhile to have one of these concepts, because it's pretty chopped up.
Because,
Get some
you know,
feedback.
that, and the idea there is, hopefully the comments will come back saying, I don't like A because there's all this hardscape pavement.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I like the house, but I don't like all the pavement.
Right. And maybe that's why you did it. I mean, right.
Yeah, I
Like
don't,
you were
I
saying.
would completely concur with that, I think.
But I think all three concepts have too much. That's my point. Yeah.
And to clarify, for the white is the only paved,
I know.
white and black,
Yeah.
and then the tan is the.
Yeah, and it's too much.
Lots of accessibility, but, and
Yeah.
let's see, you want,
But you
where do you
can
want
have
accessible?
pervious accessible
Sure.
pathways.
Yeah, like, I mean, for me, I wouldn't find the need to put a circle of a 10-foot wide multi-use path.
Mhm.
Thinking of a food cart, because I can't imagine putting a food cart on the front edge of the lawn. I mean, that's not where I would put a food cart. If we were gonna do something with a food cart, it wouldn't be blocking the Capitol view. You know, so I wouldn't, so the whole idea of having that circle be this massive thing that you could drive around doesn't make sense to me. I mean, it's part of the concrete thing that goes with it. I guess I'm also wondering, as it relates to the three, and again, maybe this is just because we're trying to get a reaction, but as I think about the outcomes, and the sort of overall vision for the space. And I know that this is not necessarily shared by everybody, I'm not sharing my own opinion. Based on what we've heard. It's hard for me to imagine that, to Rick's point, tearing down a facility and having nothing more but restrooms and a small shelter meets our needs. And so, because it doesn't, it completely limits programming, classrooms, 4-year activities. I mean, year-round activities. I mean, it just really limits it.
Sometimes some people might think that's a good thing.
I know that.
So
But if our desired outcome, I'm not saying, I completely understand that.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that if our desired outcomes are otherwise, which is to say that in order for this, that a desired outcome is that this property is embraced, is utilized from the feedback that we got from people. We heard, for instance, from Jesse and from other people, it would be nice to have a classroom space. It would be nice to have a place so that we don't have to worry about when it's crappy weather, we can't go with the class, or with Alva Leopold, or with, and so do we want to be presenting something that has effectively so little if that's really not going to meet the outcomes that have been identified by the community?
I don't know. I mean, I think there was a lot of support for a minimalist approach to the property. So I think it makes sense to me to have one of the three kind of emphasize that approach, and we'll see. Once it's more fleshed out like this, I think we'll get better feedback, like you're saying. Maybe show it things a little more extreme than you would actually do to get people to respond.
And this is what we asked for, right?
Yeah.
These three kinds.
Well, I think articulate a range of each concept. There will be a range of things that can be accomplished through the facilities on the site. And that's something that needs to be articulated. So like even the ideas we have with the house are starting to get the juices flowing of what could happen in the house. Now, there's all sorts of questions around how to accomplish any of that, right? And that's to me next further down the road. But we can get a good reaction, I think, to the range of possibilities, I think, with what's being presented in the facility. Then there's the whole financial question. In addition to like, are we going to get the outcomes we want?
Right.
Well, what can we afford? And minimalistic may end up being minimal amount spent, which may mean keep the house because it's cheaper than knocking it down. Right? So
Yeah.
I think those are all, to me, questions that we evaluate a little bit later in the process. But for now, we're getting a good sense of what could be possible with different approaches. I think is what we want.
So should we go back to the question of what are we missing from these that we want them to include?
So, A and B show much more accessible pathway, which I know brings in the issue of, I think, maybe if they're gonna be truly accessible, most of it should be paid. I think you can create, non-paved surfaces that meet ADA, but then you gotta maintain them, make sure that they stay that way. But anyway, but I noticed A and B have more, including that C doesn't have any of that kind of paved path along the lakefront, which I think is the most desirable place for everybody. I know you're getting there, so I don't know.
Is there like a spot in between that of C and like A and B that they could change out? And
Well, that might be one of those things again, where you're showing one that, just inadequate in my view, for the accessibility. And get, see what kind of reaction you get. Those observations.
The more paths, the better, in my opinion, quite honestly. The way the trick, and it's a, I don't know, but it's a designer's way of getting you guys, when you walk through a space, to sort of straight lines as you come around curves, constantly coming around reveals. And so having a path that's 10 feet wide in concrete is great, because I know a family with stroller is going to be able to enjoy that view. I know somebody in a wheelchair is going to be able to go on that path, and somebody who's in a motorized vehicle or a cart, that's disabled, can go ahead and use that space. Can have multiple people be able to use that space. So having a path is, I think, is great. Having a loop, you could even probably expand it even farther up to the north of it, quite honestly, and then you could create that massive loop and have a story about that, perhaps, or and give somebody, hey, let's go walk the loop. You
But it
give
has
them
to be
something.
concrete, it couldn't be, didn't we just talk about this? I'm not saying there shouldn't be a path.
I
I'm
guess
just saying, does it have to be concrete?
in terms of like, what's it take to plow it, keep it clean, and what's the longevity in terms of, I'm looking at it in terms of like what's practical and makes sense for the cost.
The maintenance is more expensive, and pervious paths are much more expensive, as we learned at the river time. The pervious pavement we put in there, than other options, I know.
And the lighter tan walks, we drew them at 6 foot wide. So when you think about strollers and wheelchairs, that's the width, kind of the width you want minimum.
Sure.
Now the darker brown one, or the brown ones, are smaller.
Would it be helpful at this stage, instead of calling them concrete walks, to call it whether it's paved surface or hard surface, to understand the circulation, and if that's desirable? There can be a more defined conversation, master plan level, when you have some costs associated with it. If the community wants to see and will support permeable systems.
Yeah, I like what you just said, is the type of circulation. I think the type of circulation is important, rather than calling it.
And we still
What
can
type of
change, we can adjust the labeling so that
surfaces,
it,
yeah.
and that's really, I think, at this level, what we can understand is getting people around the site, setting up those views, setting up those spaces. And avoiding people getting caught on, well, I don't want to see concrete out there, I'd rather see brick pavers or permeable asphalt.
Right.
That can be a discussion, and that can come in the master plan phases. We move into
Yeah.
that.
Definitely.
Can I just, sorry to interrupt. I'm one of the chief inspectors at St. Stephen's, and I have to go back. Thank you. With the election wrap up, I guess we run out of big ballots, so. The big ones.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's all right.
if you Wanna
Sure.
take over his chair and keep me posted on what happens?
I mean, I was gonna say with Doug's comment, again, to get maybe Gordon some reaction of, getting maybe one of these white paths more north in one of these, because I feel like concept B and A with path wise is relatively similar. And you could extend that so that somebody, that it would show maybe greater access to that area. And then at least somebody would have the ability to get everywhere in one path.
The other thing that I think helpful is, I know in terms of presentation is the RFPs is you know, you spent some time explaining what the nodes might be. But the average person looking at these is not gonna get that detailed explanation, and I think there's some, you know, not unlike visuals that you provided as part of this packet. I think you need to connect some A and B there in terms of.
Almost flip it. You could talk about.
Right.
Some of the ideas with the nodes, so you're gonna see these throughout the thing.
Yeah, I think the general public is gonna, like, I don't think they're gonna, I think they're gonna wanna look at this and say, oh, I understand this, like, as a general public person. Rather than you having to explain to us
Right.
all of what the nodes are or what these paths are like, you know, and like, the colors, you didn't,
Right.
they are hard to tell, so I like that you are labeling them. That makes more sense.
Right, and like, well, you know, I mentioned the bird thing and you said, well, that could be one of the nodes. Well, that's great, but I would, you know, you're not gonna be there to explain that to every person that's looking at these.
Yeah.
You know, so
Maybe the potential node, what the potential node are.
potential node, right, like where you, again, where you, if the playscape's not in there, and we talked about the playscape in the same thing. But if, you know, if, or if one of the nodes, you know, is where, you know, Chipotle game or something, you know, you know, it would.
Would be kind of like the outdoor rooms, right?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so label them in that point.
And then the outdoor rooms we did for Kohler preserves in Sheboygan, they went an art walk. And so we broke it down into 4 different types of rooms. So it's kind of the same thing. We could break this down into a couple of different types of nodes. And in this grouping of nodes, it could be playscapes and fun areas for kids. This type of node could be the bird watching platforms, that sort of thing. If we could do it that way, so then up front in the survey, you've got these different types of things that can occur in a node. And then when you go to the concepts, you could relay numbers to those pictures.
I think the overall comment. When you just look at this. You feel like a really big property. And after I reviewed these plans and then I actually went to the site, I was like, wait a minute, this is so deceiving. So. Rather than having just arrows to the nodes. Like what amount of space will that
Right.
playscape take up?
Yeah.
That would be helpful to understand, because it's probably gonna be a big chunk of space.
Yeah.
As opposed to,
Right.
that might be helpful too.
I do think winnowing down to like 3 or 4 nodes would be good, because you know, I think it would be kind of overwhelming to people to be sorting through 7 or 8 different nodes. And I agree with Wes that getting more of a sense of how much space.
Are there any benefits to the peer locations? Like I know, well, concept A, obviously, because that's where people naturally come in now, but is there any benefit to shifting it up?
Just the depth of the water.
Wasn't the, do we know exactly where the original boathouse was? Because that obviously was where they chose to put it then. At the pier then.
I don't know where the boathouse was, but we, there's the.
I think it was further
the
north.
spring.
I think it was at least into
Concept B is
the
just
end
like
there.
a little further north. Concept B is a little further north. It's still within the retaining wall. So I mean,
So where they
Twilight.
like to the retaining.
yeah, I mean, and if you walk it, there's some cinder blocks still there. Some of the foundation is still there. And I wouldn't say it's probably much more than, I mean, I don't know what the scale is, but yeah, within 50 feet of north of the pier.
Right where the steps are shown on that diagram, that's where the newer wall starts.
I think Andy just brought up a good point about having a scale on this. Like 1 to 100 or something.
There's a scale.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So that,
I'm used to seeing it on the left,
Yeah.
sorry.
I think the peer question. So out of these three concepts, how does water access to the park from the water change? So it is. You change the length of the pier. I think to try to get to deeper water and see. But could you lengthen the pier in concept A and actually achieve? Just for the sake of discussion, you could achieve more boat slips, I think. If you're in deeper water. So is that something we wanna explore a range of options? You put that pier like further north, it changes the nature of water access. And
I don't know if this would be worthwhile, but like when you're bringing that up, I think about, okay, what's something I know and is relatable? So like when you bring up kind of the sail piers on a stone bridge. Yeah. So I don't know if there's like reference points. I mean, we don't want to like replicate this to another Monona Park necessarily, but like if there's reference points, and I think like parking lot, I don't know how big the parking lot is at Dream Park, but I think that's one of the bigger parking lots, aside from who's got bigger parking lots that we have. I mean, Jake would probably be able to say how many parks, but like those reference points that Jake could probably help you with as you're presenting to say, you know, like when you're thinking about a natural space, if you think about the Dream Park and that size, that's what we're thinking about here. Or like 51 stalls, if that's the size of, you know, what's at the Dream Park. But like, to your point of like envisioning what is usable and what's not, and having those reference points, I think is.
it is a small site, because when you think Olbert Park, the new shelter that they built, that parking lot's bigger than 50 stalls. It's a lot bigger than 50 stalls. But you look at 50 stalls on this side, it's huge. It's a huge expansive paved area.
Well, another question I have with parking, I hate that we keep going back to parking, but I mean, it's a paved place and we need parking there somehow. It'd be helpful, like, how many parking spots equals how many people? And so like, are we talking, so when we think of like events on the property, the 16 stalls that are on the minimalist side, you know, that would be what, 12 people or
12 to 24.
yeah, 12 to 24 people.
64, 2 to 4 people per car.
2 to 4.
typically.
Yeah. So I don't know what the standard like or regulation is, but that to me would be helpful too, because if we're looking at the amount of parking, I mean, I think that's under parking and concept B, but you know, if we're talking
larger than even this largest parking service.
yeah. So I mean, that's helpful for me to know, because I think about 51, I think that's huge and I can do anything, but again, the size of the house, you know, if you keep the house, that's going to be a higher amount of people.
And yeah, so for, say you had 150 to 200 people in a parking lot for the house, then that's getting to be sizable for an event. But for the beer garden, it's just like beer garden last year. You have to walk or bike or some other means to get there, because there's just not going to be parking for that.
But well, I mean, depending on how the house is utilized, there's not gonna be 150, 200 people in the house.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, you know, it's not, I mean, it's 3 different store, I mean, at least in every concept that you put in. It's small event spaces and offices or art studios or whatever the concept, but it's not like it's a big wide open space. That we're gonna go to a lecture. So I'm not saying, it's hard for me to imagine, even though it's a bigger facility, it's hard for me to imagine kind of numbers.
So I don't know if you guys are taking everything you need from us, but we're gonna have them talk about the buildings at some point where.
Do you have us all, do you have everything?
Dan's been writing as you've been.
I want to give Marilee and Jesse, I wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity. I know it's tough virtually to be recognized.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, one question I had is, like, I'm seeing, and I'm sorry if I missed this, is there a dollar amount per concept? I see the dollar signs next to some images. Just thinking about that public presentation, is there a dollar per concept based on these?
No, we haven't done estimates yet at this time, but the dollar signs that you're seeing are on the buildings, and we ask Alexis to put dollar signs like on a menu to indicate to you as a steering committee that this is going to be more expensive than that.
So when it's dollar, like when it's a dollar sign 0.5, what is that?
$1.5. Alexis will tell us here.
Half of a dollar, it's only gonna cost you 50 cents? Holy cow, that's great.
Before we jump into the house thing, I want to make sure Justin, we should say anything else about the landscaping piece.
No, obviously, I'm continuing to try to look at this through the lens of how the school might, and all of our schools. I'm at Winnequa in an elementary school, but even thinking of Monona Grove High School and others as well. We sit with about 4 or 5 sections of each grade level. So, if we're thinking of 4th graders coming out, we're talking of, over 100 kids. And so thinking about that and those spaces and just what might be feasible in there for, a day of learning. I don't think this will be like, let's just take a quick trip over for 20-30 minutes or one lesson. I think it will be more kind of excursions for the day and trying to, view that as potential of using that space as learning spaces. So obviously concepts sticking out to me, like just having that enough space for students, and students move a lot, and so I struggle a little bit just having seen the group that we took out last year of in the house, and we took one group in at a time, about 20 kids, and they were pretty tight in there when they were moving around. So obviously concepts that allow some movement and that number of students are continuing to come to the forefront of my mind.
That's great. Marilee, let's see that just gonna give her a second. Okay. She had a nice background, so I'm guessing she's on vacation or something. Obviously it wasn't the windswept of the -7 degrees. Okay, any other additional comments?
Can I just say something to Jesse's point, since he's talked about bringing out students, since maybe you want to show van parking. Like at least one spot for van parking.
I don't know if it's connected to that, but when he was talking, I was thinking of like drop-off area.
Yeah,
I think maybe that's it, yeah.
Connected for sure.
Where kind of naturally it lends itself currently how it is, but
Yeah.
And dropping off in a parking lot.
If we're gonna jump off the landscaping, I do want to just a couple of things that I would want to add. I did second your thought on the parking lot and why wouldn't it be maybe more by the road. So maybe if you guys could go possibly back to the drawing board, and if we need to have parking, how can we keep the concrete by the concrete and the grass and the green by the grass and green, and then using perhaps the prairie planting area or the savanna planting area as a shield, kind of creating that shield between the parking area and the greenscaping. So there's an opportunity there. And then even possibly looking at other sizes of that entire savanna type planting, it is huge. And so like, who's going to maintain that? What's that process like? I know Woodland Park is a lot of work to maintain. I think John Traeger. Sorry. So just the maintenance of it, I'm seeing a lot of it as well, in terms of keeping it in a pristine savanna style. And then the last thing I would say is down by the water, down by the woodland area, there's a lot of amazing naturally occurring sedges and plants that are doing a wonderful job providing ground cover. And so it'd be great to explore options in terms of how we can use those plants that are already naturally there that we can put to work in a horticultural way to kind of cover space and yet provide that native habitat. They're actually really, really great. Thanks with them when I saw them this year. So I think there's opportunity.
I have something to add, if that's okay. As far as parking spaces go, can that be a flex area? Is that something that, yes, they're parking, but it's also an area where we have an art fair where vendors bring their carts, or that's where the food carts go. You know, is there somewhat that can be, you know, a flex space also?
Right, anything else, Marilyn? Oh. All right, do you have enough feedback to adjust and then come back to the next meeting? All right, we'll, so we want to hear from Alexis, but, public engagement meeting, we can talk about at our next meeting, right? Public engagement will be after that.
Yeah, so I guess we had talked at the last meeting, that would be in March. Following today's discussion, but does that look like it needs to be in
I
April?
thought we decided on it. At
Yeah,
the
so,
beginning of this meeting, we said April.
I'm just calendar that we got was March, right? Yeah.
Originally, yeah, we discussed last. And if that's the case, then
I think we need one more.
I think.
Pass it forward.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else as far as the timeline that you wanted to touch on? Because
No, that was the main thing, was we were either gonna do it in March or shift it to April.
Jake, are you okay with that? Discussion?
Yeah, I can just jump in if we're not in a place where we're ready to have a public input meeting before March 24th, then I would recommend that we hold off until after the April 6th, maybe that following week, so we could use a regularly scheduled meeting March 21st. There will just be some, the goal for tonight is to make sure that you're comfortable with what the date and times of when we're going to be releasing the 3 concepts to the public. And if we want to wait, I would recommend you try to have it out in March if possible, and have a couple of weeks for people to be able to review them and go into an April public presentation. But we do not have access to the high school auditorium in March or April. So most likely this next meeting would be at the library in the forum room.
So we can move forward with the April, our regular scheduled meeting in April as the date for the public. And then we would have our next meeting in March to finalize, and then hopefully it would be good to go to approve after that.
Does it make sense to try to move our March meeting?
Earlier.
Well, yeah, I'm just thinking if we're not finalized yet. And we need to finalize, and to Jake's point around making sure that the public has the final concepts and a clear, posted at least several weeks before the.
Yeah, 21st would be our next meeting. So at our next meeting, we'd have to finalize the survey, right? And I'm guessing it'll take us a while to finalize the survey based on the last survey we had.
Are we?
And that's
Sorry,
something that
do
you guys look at.
At the same time.
the discussion at the last meeting was the survey would go out, the story map and survey would go out. Ahead of the public meeting, and after approval of.
Yeah, but we wouldn't necessarily have the results of the survey or the public meeting. So it would still be open.
The intent would be to get as much information out. Because the survey will have additional breakdown and different ways to look at the concepts and get as much information out publicly as possible. So that when people are coming to the public meeting, they're either have questions or somewhat knowledgeable, and some will be. And that will be our.
It can be simpler this time, perhaps. So here's what we've heard. This is this is what you're seeing, and what do you like? What do you like? Or maybe if we're approving our goals, it should be somewhat responsive to what we're trying to achieve too. Next, to avoid a long survey for the discussion.
So again, does it make sense if we're looking at our April date as the date to do the public meeting, do we need to move the March meeting date?
I think it depends on our schedules. With the people schedule, yeah.
Right.
I mean, it would be nice to move it up if possible.
There's just not much time between the sixth.
April and April.
March 20.
March 21st is the.
So we'd come back and revise
The-
concepts, survey draft,
Day.
and some additional kind of diagrams for the public meeting.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful
We
too.
wouldn't have a meeting, a regular meeting in April, right?
Correct.
We, wait.
I think if we can get approval of all that on the 21st.
Yeah.
We have time to share the plans, share the survey. When would the April meeting be?
It's the 18th.
Oh, I thought it was the sixth. I thought somebody said it was the sixth. It's like, yeah, that's on the.
If it's on, if the public meeting's the 18th, that works.
So next meeting, approval, or well, not approval, but. Acceptance of the, your concept plan. And then. Having a draft and then feedback on a draft of the survey. I think it would be helpful to know I mean, you touched on it, kind of how you'll present these two. I think Wes kind of connected that of like, what are your themes? How are you gonna do that? Because I think kind of being very bold and kind of confident in how we're presenting this to the group, I think will be important as to what their response is and how they believe we're moving forward. Not that you need a dry run or anything like that.
Well, and we've got to be able to communicate simply that it's an à la carte in a sense.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, so having kind of those little tidbits of like, what do you want to make sure you're highlighting of really important. That's it,
Jay, did you say that the 18th was not available at school?
March and April, he said, or not,
Yeah, I think maybe April 8th, we didn't look that far out. On April 18th, I can see if the school is available that date. Otherwise, I'm sure we can get the library forum room, which would be sufficient. But we'll try to, if that's the date we're looking at, we can put the request in.
Does the municipal room hold more people than the community center?
Yeah, I don't know. Probably
Okay.
better AV access.
Well, yeah. Okay. All right, does everyone feel good with where we're at and?
Yeah, I do think getting the school is probably gonna be helpful because it's hard for me to imagine that people will be able to, that library space, I think would be really small with 3 different concepts and if
we
in
have to work
fact
with the
people are
space.
walking around providing feedback like they did when we were at the high school.
This is why we need space.
Yeah. I think it would be challenging because the library room is not tiny, but I think it's gonna be a lot of interest in this.
Yeah.
We're apt to have a lot of people show up and then if you're a lot of people showing up and you want those people to mingle around boards and.
We can have those out in the hallway though, the boards.
Yeah, but I just think it's a tighter space if we can't, I think the school would be better if we could get it.
So are you proposing that we move it back just to get the school?
No,
Oh,
it was Jason.
No, I just want to make
No,
sure,
he-
we
no,
have
he-
to work with the space. we
Yeah,
have.
no, he said he doesn't know if we could get.
Yeah.
I was just saying, I think it would be,
Auditorium would be ideal.
yeah.
All right,
Minutes.
yeah, for 9 minutes, Alexis, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess that's like another question on the kind of next meetings. What I can certainly tell you what I can tell you in 5 minutes, or I'm not sure if you have additional time today, or if we want to have a talk about this, table it more for a full discussion and at the next meeting or an additional meeting. Happy to do that as well. Whatever folks would prefer.
I don't think you want to go, extend our time tonight.
No.
We gotta go vote.
So I think.
I'm with you.
I think a question for the next couple of minutes here is at this point in the process where we're, very high level concept, what are the how did you approach your thinking as you're starting to map out different building programs?
Yeah, so essentially for, just thinking about concept A as a starting point, where with that concept, thinking about rehabilitating the house, we kind of looked at, 3 potential program directions or sub-concepts, if you will. And those 3 are not necessarily meant to be exhaustive or absolute by any sense of the means, but really just an intention to show kind of a variety of feasible focuses for the different spaces, different ways that you might repurpose the house. And at this point, somewhat kind of, diagrammatic in terms of, not fully developed plans by any stretch of the means. That will come certainly with time, or even post master plan, once you kind of have a direction, whether it involves the house or a different structure. But really, some diagrams to start visualizing, how could you reprogram the spaces, and starting to get an idea of, what is the capacity of the different spaces based on use or the size of the space, and whether or not there are spaces that you can, certain parts of the house that lend itself a little bit more to kind of opening up the space from how it's been kind of compartmentalized over time with the Franciscan use, where other spaces that are more the kind of signature historic finishes on the first floor, where those are still present, and you have some more kind of constraints that you might want to leave in place and work around, with like the fireplaces in the corners and those historic finishes. So that was one, kind of lead in. And then another is, with each of the 3 concepts, we were really looking at, with all 3 of them, providing spaces that address some of those. And I'm still just thinking about the rehabilitating the house, but spaces that, with that first concept, but spaces that address, and I guess for this comment, really all the new building and open pavilion is applicable to as well, but addressing some of those main themes of, accommodating a space that can accommodate that community education or interpretation, or a gathering space with the students and things coming as well, but also spaces that would be, that are left fairly open, kind of simple in their fit out and finishing or detailing, that lend themselves to flexibility and functionality, that flexibility that would allow that, variety of use even within one single space itself. But also looking at, especially with that, I guess, again, with the rehabilitation, but also a new construction or a new structure, but that opportunity to provide some income producing potential, whether that's a transient or kind of a daily or a periodic manner, or something that's a longer term lease. I think some of the, with the house and having the multiple stories, that may be a little bit more possible in that concept, in terms of maybe introducing even a mix of, one floor as a longer term lease tenant, versus other spaces that are more flexible and open for the public uses and community programming. So, and certainly all 3 of, in particular, the rehabilitating concepts with the house, they're all versions that could be phased over time. So I think, we're all talked about that activating that first floor as kind of a first phase. And with that certainly will come, some work to the existing structure in terms of some work to the envelope or upgrades to the systems, some, repairs to things like the, select locations of the foundation, that kind of thing. But then certainly that first floor phase and providing accessibility and creating that for that first floor. And then that second and third floor, could be activated or renovated or repurposed over time. And I think, certainly with all 3 of the rehabilitating the house concepts, it's kind of no secret that, a couple of our challenges will certainly be, our biggest challenges will be that vertical, accessibility, but certainly vertical access and egress up and down through the floors. And the more public, that second and third floor become, the more important that will also come into play in terms of accessibility up, vertically through the space, and what is the occupancy, and what are those kind of, ramifications with the code will kind of impact that puzzle to solve with, what are the modifications and changes that might need to be made to the egress down through the structure. And then the second thing being probably the restrooms in terms of, carving out spaces to make those that vertical access happen, or the restrooms kind of work and become accessible, have the dimensions that are needed for the accessibility. One thing just to quickly point out in the third concept is thinking about, the third concept of the house real quick was, and just one tidbit on that third sub-concept of rehabilitating the house. That one is one where we started to look at in the west wing there, where the kitchens are located, and that kind of repurposed what was it originally the stall, so north, up on the plan basically, where that green block is on the first floor. Yeah. So in this concept, we started to kind of ask that question, for the group or what have you, about whether if we're looking at a concept where we're rehabilitating the house, do the restrooms on that first floor, are those something that are going to start serving the park at large, and so that there's separate access for the restrooms, and you're not building separate restroom structures elsewhere on the site, or as in the other two kind of sub-concepts for that look at rehabilitating the house, really we're starting to just show, those ones are really just showing the restrooms being specific to the internal programming of the house. And without knowing that don't have time today to kind of talk a little bit more about the differences between these sub-concepts in terms of the programming, thinking about, the other concepts, one where you are just building, separate individual restroom facilities, as well as like an open air pavilion. So if you kind of go to your concept B, yep. So there's some different ways that, you can creatively and simply, simple structures, but simple structures that can still bring in, indigenous design concepts, or, natural design concepts, simple structures that are, appropriately scaled, fairly easy to maintain. And both the restrooms provide some kind of overhead shelter, and then the open air shelter, you can see some precedents and images there, but also on that second page, where you start to see, where you can kind of have that combination with an open air shelter with some restrooms and storage, as well as that, semi-protected gathering space. And then in the third, your concept C, to go with your concept C of the site plans, of a completely new, 4-season pavilion, if you will, 4-season structure. Obviously the benefit of rehabilitating the house is certainly capitalizing on a structure you already have, that direct interpretation of the history, and celebrating some of those historic finishes that are still there. The benefit of, in flip side, the benefit of an all new facility is you can right size that facility, design it, just for exactly what you're looking to accomplish with your programming and wanting that to serve, as opposed to trying to, having the constraints of the existing house and the scale and kind of the breakup of those rooms, and trying to figure out that right fit programming. Here you can kind of obviously design exactly to what your specific desires and needs would be. But in this case, it's, thinking about a more simple structure, something that would be a little more straightforward in terms of maintenance, inside and out. Again, you can still create something beautiful, but keep things fairly simple, and easy to maintain. And then again, being able to kind of introduce the ability, the opportunity to introduce indigenous design concepts into the design, or also if you go to the next page that was included with this one. You know, if the house is removed, we move forward with a concept where the house is removed, you know, I think there's opportunities there to pull some inspiration from the house and some of its finer points in terms of the detailing, and how do you kind of re-celebrate that and some of the design concepts of a new structure, but also how do you interpret, is there a way to interpret that that history in terms of perhaps where the footprint of the house was. And it can even be something as simple as that, you know, something very natural. Maybe it becomes one of the nodes, if you will, on the site plan in terms of using natural elements to kind of outline that, and a place where that can kind of be represented and discussed and on the site. And we did leave, just real quickly here, a second kind of placeholder for a second concept of, you know, in that first page, we showed a couple of quick diagrams of what, you know, that kind of meeting multi-purpose space in a new pavilion, a new structure might be, with a couple different scales. But this one, we did leave kind of a second, you know, could create a second sub-concept if there was a vision for some, a different kind of program that we didn't show in terms of, or expanding that program to be something bigger than just a single room that would accommodate, you know, 100 people at a time kind of thing. And this last page that you were just on is just another kind of supplemental concept that we put together quickly in terms of just thinking this could actually, you know, accompany any of the other concepts as sort of in addition to, but thinking about impermanent structures or something that is temporary or movable, and you know, kind of that tiny house scale down to a tent scale, or a yurt kind of scale, so that camping transient feel, which would also then have some, you know, ties back to the kind of that indigenous use of the site. So that was just a couple of ideas there that could be thought of kind of outside of the box, but also kind of how can you make this site unique and something that maybe there isn't a place for, you know, in that urban context that you have. It's sort of that little sanctuary that you have within the greater urban context there on the shore, and some places that could provide some, you know, peace, quiet, seclusion, and do something that's kind of simple and a light touch on the land as well.
Really appreciate all of that in like a short amount of time, because I know you spent a lot of time on this. You bring up some great points that actually might go back to the concept plans, because wasn't even thinking. You mentioned the restrooms and the accessibility for the outside to use those restrooms. And I guess I just assumed that as far as when this house, you know, in these concept plans, that we would have access to the restroom, because otherwise then you're building a whole new facility.
Exactly, yeah.
So, I mean, you bring up that good point, and then that led me to, you know, at some point down the road, we'll have to have a discussion of, at a minimal level, what would we need to require? Because, I mean, there's a lot of good plans here for restoring the house, but I mean, to me, as a public facility, you need an elevator that reaches all of the floors. So that's obviously my personal opinion, but that would obviously impact like how the inside structure looks and different things like that. So that's a conversation down the road of what would a facility require, including accessibility to the outside.
Program requirements.
Yeah.
My only quick question was, I'm looking at the layout A and B on C1, where you started to lay out the assignable square footage for, looks like you assume, okay, we need to fit 100 people into an education space. So that looks like it's total 6,000 square feet.
Yeah, I think you're right. It would probably be about, you know, that calculation is really would just be that room, the main room. So then, you know, if you're kind of almost doubling it to provide some support services, if those were attached and included, you'd probably be closer to about 6,000 for a full structure. And that was just taking feedback, you know, we saw, and you know, of course, some of the feedback was all over the map in terms of how many people, but that 100, you know, if you bring one fourth grade classrooms from one elementary school to the site, you probably, you know, typically there may be like 4 classrooms of 25 kids or something like that, just as so we saw that 100 people as somewhat of a common number, but I know you've also talked about up to 200 as well, so.
Yeah, I think those are some of the things we have to refine and then. Oh,
Yeah.
Can I just, I wanted to
Last
say,
comments.
I will, it occurred to me, something for consideration might be also putting, maybe it's a node thing or just on the drawing, it's like the bike thing. I think if we're talking about the garden, which we are in all three concepts, we're talking about the garden and fruit trees. Probably having some sort of, and or thinking about it as some sort of a teaching garden, or I think you're gonna need some sort of small shed or something over there too. Like there's a shed there now, it's in the woods, and I mean, there's all kinds of gardening equipment. That's kept in year round in the woods, John, because, and there's just, I'm not. You gotta have something. It's not gonna work. All the way across that farm. It's just gonna be a true working garden.
Maybe that's a chance for one of these impermanent structures, right?
Maybe.
Final comments.
And yeah, and like I said, we're happy to maybe spend a little more time talking about the diagrams that for the rehabilitation concept of the house, just to give a little more context or clarity to those at the next meeting at the beginning. We're happy to do that.
At the beginning. Anything additional?
Thank
All
you.
right,
Thanks for your work.
Yes.
motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
All those nay? Stay right here.
Your name.
No, is it really? Oh, no.
Thank you, Dance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.